If you're working in sales and you're selling a product or a solution and you need to speak to B2B customers, founders, CEOs, CFOs, people in HR, this is where you need to start. Now, working in B2B sales is a lot different to B2C sales. If you're working in B2C sales, generally speaking, you're speaking to people at a customer level, mums and pups. You're speaking to people that might be making a personal investment in an e-commerce product, some hair care, skincare. How you market to those types of professionals is completely different to how do you market to people in a B2B context. Sales Inc. does a lot of B2B campaigns, and we also still do some B2C campaigns. But what I'm talking about here is where you start when you want to run a B2B campaign. So first and foremost, what do you need to do? First of all, you need to define who your ideal customer is. Now, some people call this ICP, your ideal customer profile. Now, what does that actually mean? What is your ideal customer profile? So, you might be completely new to the market. This actual solution that has been launched might not really have any customers yet. It might not be even tried and tested. So what you need to do is you need to think about who your product can help and then look at ways that you can find them. So for example, you might have a product that unlocks efficiencies for a business because it saves companies money on their payroll. Okay, so what my mind immediately thinks there is it's an efficiency-based solution, but it's also a cost saving. It would probably appeal to the CFO, but at the same time, someone like a CEO would probably be involved on the journey because CEOs are always, thinking about culture and business efficiencies. But the CFO, it sounds like it's directly in his or her wheelhouse, and it will be something that helps them. So when you're defining your ideal customer profile, you're looking at your product, your solution, and who it would help. If you've already got a product that's several years old and you've got a tried and tested customer base, you need to look at your customer base and you need to look at the commonalities and you need to sort of build out your ICP. Now, you do this in two ways, and there's two solutions, or there's two ways that we do this here at Sales Inc. First of all, we look at the overall demographics of the underlying company. So if we're looking at the demographics, we'll look at, first of all, the companies. We'll look at what industry these companies are in. Some companies have solutions that are broad brush that help all industries. Some companies have solutions that might just help companies in financial services. Okay, very narrow market. Some might have solutions that might only help in a couple of markets. It might be financial services and healthcare, for example. So we look at those industries that the company can help in. Now, the next thing is we're looking at the actual underlying company. We're also looking at the company size. We tend to find most of the time, all things being equal, there are some outliers to this, but generally speaking, the bigger the company, the longer the sales cycle can be. If you've got a company that's got a headcount of 50,000, there's a lot of people that have got to be involved in the decision-making process, and as a result, the deal can move slower. It's always going to be bigger, and it's going to look good in your pipeline, but the deal will move slower. So you want to break down who is your sweet spot in terms of company size. Generally speaking, a lot of companies aren't looking out to target businesses that have a small headcount of 1 to 10 because you don't get the scale on the back end. But also as well, they like to target the biggest companies in town, but at the same time, you can't solely invest in the biggest company in town because they've got long sales cycles. So we like to categorize our list sizes in terms of headcount, in terms of 1 to 10, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, 201 to 500, 501 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, and 10,000 plus. You've got to look at your audience, the people that have converted in the past, and where the sweet spot is for your product or solution right now. Once you've looked at those two things, there are some additional things at a company level that you can search for. Location. So, you might have a global audience. So you might be pulling companies anywhere. It doesn't matter. You might not be time zone constrained. So where the company location is doesn't faze you. Or you might only be able to operate in a certain jurisdiction. So when you're looking at these companies, you're running a postcode filter. Okay, so you might be running like an as the crow flies postcode filter. What do I mean by that? You might be able to help companies in the Sydney basin. So you're looking at all the postcodes in that region and you're pulling companies that are in that region. You also might be targeting companies at a demographic level that have some form of regulatory change. This is usually at an industry level, but it can be slightly nuanced. There can be certain things that are mandatory, and as a result, you might fill a compliance gap for these types of businesses, and you want to run a filter based on that. The other thing that you want to do as well, that we do, is we look at two things. One is we look at revenue growth or revenue as a whole. Now, unless a company's publicly listed, sometimes this can be a little bit opaque, but can you make some assumptions? And there's some good tools out there like Apollo that will give you an estimate on their revenue. If you've got a company that is purely raising capital, but doesn't necessarily have cash flow or is bootstrapping, their decisions are going to be made differently. Some are going to be holding on to their pennies. Some are going to be spending, not necessarily frivolously, but are going to be investing a lot more aggressively. Companies that are in a growth phase with lots of revenue, they're going to be investing that money as well. So you're looking at underlying revenue. One other thing that we look at as well is we look at companies that are growing headcount, that are in expansion, not contraction. Something like LinkedIn is good for running this filter, and you can see company headcount growth over a period of time. If you're a company that's growing, and you've got a solution that caters to companies with, big headcounts, you're going to be in a better position to solve an individual business's problem. So, guys, when we've ran all these filters, the good thing about once we've defined our ICP and we've gone through this process, it'll tell us our total addressable market, or what's better known as TAM. And if we know our total addressable market, we know how much potential runway we have if our product is being picked up at a certain percentage. Let's say if we're closing at, we're getting meetings we're getting a certain amount of connectivity on the phone initially. We're then getting meetings at a certain rate. We're then closing at a certain rate. Based on our TAM, we know how much runway we have. But once we've looked at our total addressable market and we've looked at our underlying data set from a demographic standpoint, we look at the firmographics. So what are the firmographics? So the firmographics, we're looking at the contacts at the company that we want to get in touch with. So when we build audiences here at Sales Inc., we're always looking at the firmographics. So what do I mean by that? We always diversify our risk with any underlying business with at least 2 contacts. Sometimes we build 3, sometimes we build 4. The reason why we do this is so we can enter a business through what we like to call an evangelist, someone that will sing the product or services praises, the person that might help the most. But also as well, we like to get buy-in from the C-suite so the deal can move quickly. So depending on the solution and who it would help the most, we have our individual avatar that will help the most, and we start with that. So earlier on, I was talking about you might have a solution that is, a payroll cost-saving solution that's going to help the CFO the most. Okay, so we start with the CFO, but also as well, we might want to bring the CEO on the journey, and we might want to bring, the head of operations on the journey, because running this solution might also help the head of operations. So what we'll look to do is we'll look to build out a list with at least 2 contacts, sometimes 3. And what we look to do is we look at that person's title, look at how long they've been at the company for, and look at them digitally and sort of see what they've been up to. Guys, we've defined the parameters of who we want to target. We go about building our list. Now, we have a unique formula to build a list here at Sales Inc., which is always evolving. There is plenty of tools out there that you can end up spending an absolute arm and a leg on and end up sending yourself broke with APIs and different credits here and different credits there. Now, when it comes to these type of things, you need to be very direct with your investment, and you don't have endless pools of money. So you've got to be strategic. So this is what we use and what we like to think is best practice. But at the same time, this formula of ours is always changing as time goes by. So if we've defined our target market, generally speaking, the tools that we've used to do that is we've looked at LinkedIn Sales Navigator to look at our total addressable market, because we can find someone on LinkedIn, we're going to connect with them there initially. Okay, but we also use tools like Apollo, ZoomInfo, Lusher, and more recently we've been using a tool called Clay. We don't think one tool is absolutely perfect, and some tools work better for different campaigns. You might have a scenario where you've got a bigger audience on something like an Apollo, because it might have more SMBs, whereas like if you've got LinkedIn Sales Navigator, it's going to give you more reach at that enterprise level. Also as well, from a contact standpoint, depending on how many contacts you've got on your profile already, You might find you're going to have more second degree connections as opposed to third degree connections, or people you have no mutual connections with at all to start with. But we like to run our total addressable market in a mix of Apollo and LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Once we've found our total addressable market and we've made the assumptions and we've defined our ICP and we've looked at the different verticals, different avatars we want in the business, CFO, CEO, CTO, CISO, if we're in the cybersecurity world, we will build out the formulas in our list. So we use LinkedIn Sales Navigator for total addressable market. We then start to use Apollo to pull some of the individual things like company size, industry, and some of the regularity things. What we'll then do is we'll build out the list and we will shoot for a percentage in terms of success rate on contacts. And this all comes back to our campaign goal. So we might run a 3-month campaign, and to run a 3-month campaign and hit a certain revenue goal or hit a certain goal in terms of building a sales pipeline, we might need 1,000 leads. Okay, so we've run the filters around, ICP from a company standpoint, and we've run the filters around ICP from a contact standpoint. We might find the total addressable market's 2,000. We'll go to pull that full 2,000, but we might find that using our filters, we only get to about 1,500. We always find that the LinkedIn Sales Navigator and the Apollos overshoot to the upside, but once you actually end up pulling the data, you're always disappointed a little bit to the downside. So you always want to put a margin of error, a bit of a buffer in there, and never completely bank on whatever those numbers are. Once we pulled that data though, we use our tools to pull the individual contacts. We won't always get 3 contacts per company. We might average a 2.5x. Some of the smaller companies, we might only get 1. But generally speaking, we like to have an average of at least 2 for however many companies are in the data set. What we'll then do is we'll look to enrich these leads with emails. We find with our tools, we can get an email about 80% of the time. Got a few hacks for you there. You can use things like waterfall enrichment on something like a Clay, which shoots at about 90% once you factor in all the tools. It uses best-in-class tools. And then from there, we'll do mobile enrichment. And we find we get mobile enrichment up to about 60% of the time. The good thing, though, here at Sales Inc. as well, we've got our own proprietary database. And seeing we've made so many calls over the years, we can also fish into our own database and use some of the mobiles that we have in there. We've got mobiles in there that aren't available online, and we found those mobiles through making calls, reaching out to people, and then enriching our own database. So that's a secret sauce that you have once you run a business for almost a decade. So once we've got all that lined up and enriched, we'll get the data set ready for campaigning. Once the data set is ready for campaigning, you're ready to kick off. However, you need to look at what you do next with that data and how you sort of run a campaign and how you warm that audience up before moving to the next step. Now, what I wanted to talk about today is building your ideal customer market, looking at pulling companies online and then pulling the individual contacts. Once that is ready and you've got your data set, you want to run an awareness strategy digitally, and then you want to run a LinkedIn connection strategy to them. There's plenty of tools that we use for that. I'm going to go further into these in my next video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you've got any questions about this video, feel free to reach out to Sales Inc. anytime. Also as well, give us a follow or like the video. If you give us a follow, you're going to be the first to know when we release content. We're looking to release more and more content. We've only got a small channel, but we're looking to really help salespeople do a better job, and we're all about creating better business culture here in Australia. Thanks for watching.